Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joseph Wu. I am the Senior Manager of Technical Recruiting here at Zoox. Today, I'm excited to have our co-founder and CTO, Jesse Levinson, here with me to discuss the autonomous vehicle industry, Zoox's journey thus far. We're going to share details about Zoox culture, what it's like to work here, and also what we're looking for a potential Zoox crew. Before we get started, a quick reminder to please drop any questions you have for us in the comments. We will go live shortly. Also, if you want to look at any open roles, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen. Let's get started. Okay, Jesse. Zoox has been working at autonomous vehicles for a long time, and we've seen a lot of progress recently in the industry, including our very own robotaxi driving on public roads in California for the first time. I think a question that I often get from my friends and family is, why has it taken so long?
Well, it's a pretty hard problem, right? It's one thing to kind of get a demo together or build something that can work with a safety driver, but in order to put a robot sort of loose in the chaotic environment that is our public roads, the vehicle has to be able to handle basically whatever the world might throw at it. And so it's not just dealing with people kind of following the rules of the road, it's also dealing with people breaking the rules. And we have to handle that even better than humans do, and humans are pretty good at dealing with weird things that they don't expect. And so the first several years are all about kind of getting that foundation together and kind of iterating. But where it gets really hard is that last few percent where you really have to get that quantitative safety case that says, look, we can put this thing out there. It's going to drive miles after mile after mile, and it's going to be significantly and meaningfully safer than humans. So that's the really hard part. And it's a little bit hard in the very beginning when you start a company like this before anybody's ever done that to predict exactly how long that's going to take. The good news is that's really starting to happen now. So when you look at the industry, you look at Zoox starting to test our robotaxi on open public roads over the last few months now, you see it happening. So there's still a lot of scaling to do. We're certainly not done, but at least now we in the industry have shown that this is actually fundamentally possible to put one of these vehicles with no driver on open public roads and do that safely.
One thing that we've always talked about at Zoox as a big differentiator that really gives us an edge on competitors is our own robotaxi, right? Can you talk about some of the advantages of building hardware and software in-house simultaneously?
Yeah, so that's one of the kind of fundamental defining characteristics of Zoox specifically. Why did we start Zoox as a company? And we really believed that building the hardware and software together and using that to create the best product experience would be an important differentiator in what eventually will be a market that has multiple players. There's no way that Zoox is going to be the only company that figures out robotaxis. But we've always said that if you can build something that was tailor-made for that use case, where you really design the architecture of the vehicle around the rider experience and around the AI stack so that you make it as easy as possible for AI to understand the world around it. Things like our symmetrical kind of pod shape with the sensor pods on each corner, so each corner can see 270 degrees. And then you even think about things like the redundancy that we can build into our vehicle so that it's not only safe, but actually keeps running and doesn't get stuck a lot. And things like active suspension on each corner so we can make the smoothest possible ride, which is a great feature for riders especially. These are some of the reasons why we've gone to that sort of extra trouble of building an integrated hardware software product. We think that customers are really going to love the extra features and comfort and safety and reliability that enables.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well that that means that our company is incredibly diverse from an engineering standpoint. We look to hire software, hardware, all the above, manufacturing operations. So it's quite the diverse workforce. Over the last couple of years, Zoox has really changed a little bit. We've become an Amazon subsidiary, and we've managed to retain a lot of our own processes and culture. Can you share some of your favorite moments throughout Zoox's history, given the fact that we worked together for 7 years?
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
We've had our ups and downs. This is a really hard problem to solve,
Yeah.
and it's also hard to start a company and then keep it going when you have to spend what's turned out to be actually many billions of dollars before you have a product and make revenue. So it's an unusual kind of situation to be in. There aren't a lot of companies that have had to spend billions of dollars prior to getting a product out there. So we're really grateful to have the opportunity to do that. We've had some amazing moments over the years. The first time that we revealed our vehicle publicly at the end of 2020 was a particularly exciting one because until then we've been keeping it a pretty good secret within the company. And so being able to show the world, we've gotten so many questions over the years. Why are you building your own vehicle? Isn't that a silly thing to do? That sounds really hard. It sounds expensive. Why don't you just focus on autonomy? You're in Silicon Valley. You should just do software. Just be a software company, or just do software and sensors and computers. And our philosophy has always been that doing it together is the best way to solve the problem. So when we finally showed the world what we've been doing, the reactions really started to change. It's not that everybody necessarily was like, oh yeah, totally. But a lot of people who are skeptical started saying, oh, actually, I see why that makes a lot more sense than a retrofitted car. And then probably the most exciting moment for me was just a couple months ago when we first put our robotaxi on open public roads right here in Foster City, California. And it was kind of cool. We actually got to be the first company ever to put a street legal purpose-built robotaxi with no manual controls on open public roads, I think anywhere in the world. And so getting to be sort of the first person with Aisha to actually be in that vehicle was really cool. But what was even more rewarding was after we took that first ride, we took lots and lots of our team. People have been working on this for months or years, and they got to experience it too. And seeing their reactions and seeing how proud they were and seeing how they loved it even more than they thought they would was really rewarding. Now, of course, we're all a little bit biased, so we'll see what other customers think, but we're certainly really excited about it.
Yeah, it really. When I saw the vehicle come around the bend here in Foster City, it was very emotional for me. Actually, it had been many years of hard work to get us here, and I think one thing that Zoox does really well is build a team that's very invested in our product, very excited about what we do day to day, and that leads me to the next part, our interview process. That's what we're here to talk about. So let's talk about our interview process a little bit. A typical interview process at Zoox starts with a recruiter. So recruiters at Zoox are supposed to be your partner, really your guide throughout our process. I'll give an example of what a standard interview process is, and then we'll get into some of the questions. So typical interview process at Zoox begins with a recruiter, and that leads to a phone interview. Usually there's 1 to 2 phone interviews. This is followed by an on-site. An on-site interview process at Zoox typically takes about 4 to 5 hours of on-site interviews. This is all wrapped up with a leadership interview because fundamentally what we really look for in candidates is for them to also interview us. We want them to come into Zoox eyes wide open, knowing what they're going to get into. So Jesse, you've been involved in a lot of interviews at Zoox. You've spoke to the majority of our crew. What advice do you have for candidates, especially when it gets to the later stages of the interview process?
Well, first of all, I'm always just appreciative when people choose to interview with us because there are lots of really cool companies out there in the self-driving space, but just in general right now, like it's a pretty exciting time to be working on technology here in Silicon Valley. So always happy when people go out of their way to interview with us. And one of the things that can help people stand out a bit is if they've sort of taken the time to understand Zoox specifically and what makes us unique. When we're looking for folks, obviously we're looking for people who are qualified and all these sort of usual things, but one of the characteristics we especially look for at Zoox, and this is one of our company values, is folks who are particularly inquisitive. That means basically, asking questions about why they're doing what they're doing and trying to understand how things can be better. And so when we talk to people and they ask us questions that indicate that not only have they done their research on Zoox, that's pretty obvious, but if they're maybe thinking 1 or 2 steps further and how they might be able to help us achieve our goals in their job and asking questions about that show that they've thought through it and have creative ideas, that's always a really good sign.
Are we open to hiring people with career gaps, people that have spent some time outside of industry?
We certainly are. So first of all, people have all kinds of things that happen in their personal lives, and so we want to make sure that when we're looking at somebody's resume, if there's a gap, we're totally open to that. For people who have taken an extended amount of time away from industry, we actually have a particular program for that. We call it our returnship program, and we work with a nonprofit called Path Forward to actually specifically look for people who had great careers and then needed to take an extended gap for whatever reason and would like to re-enter the workforce. And so it's kind of in between an internship and a full-time position, and it's a really great way for folks to get back and sort of have a little bit of time to acclimate without having the 100% expectations of like you're going to be totally ready to go on day one, but also understanding that they bring wonderful experience and they're not new to the workforce. And so we've been running that for I think a bit over a year now. We've had 2 cohorts come through and it's been incredibly successful. Like almost everybody who's gone through the returnship program has ended up converting to a full-time employee, and they're doing really, really well. So we're super happy to see that, and we'd love more people to enter that way.
Is Zoox only hiring experts in the autonomous vehicle industry? I'll take a little bit of this. So, we are not. We actually value critical thinking. We actually have specific interviews that we give centered around critical thinking, the ability to really break down problems and really, really approach them from a first principles standpoint. Domain knowledge is really not that valuable for many of our roles. Certainly, there are some that require it, but and on the whole, we really value critical thinking. Do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, if you're not sure, apply, right?
Yep.
Like worst case, we say, hey, you don't know enough about this thing or that thing, but we're really looking for a diverse range of candidates with, experience that can translate across industries. If you think about Zoox, when we started the company, almost nobody had experience working on autonomous vehicles because it was a new industry. And so now it's not as hard to find people who have worked on autonomous vehicles, but still most people we hire have not specifically worked on autonomous vehicles before, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, I remember in 2016, 2017, we almost exclusively went after college graduates, PhD students, because there just was not a lot of domain experience when it came to the autonomous vehicle industry. I would encourage people to do their research on Zoox when they're interviewing with us. Communicate with your interviewer, communicate with your recruiter, ask questions. Just be curious as you go through the process with us. Okay, we're going to move over to the live Q&A, and we're getting some questions coming in right now. Okay, as we build out the Seattle office, what type of work and positions are we looking for there? How do you keep good collaboration between Seattle and California offices?
So we actually have a few satellite locations. We have a Seattle office, we have a San Diego office, and we have a Boston office. And each one has a little bit of a specialty. They're mostly software focused. In Seattle, we're especially looking for folks in the infrastructure and simulation spaces. In San Diego, we're especially looking for folks with a firmware background, and then in Boston, especially on the AI side. But those are just kind of the focus areas. We do have people all across our software teams, and in even a few cases, some of our other teams, although that's more of an exception basis. And so, yeah, if you're doing something that is advertised as available in our Seattle office or one of our other offices, please apply. We do have most of the company here in Foster City and in the Bay Area, but we definitely recognize there's some wonderful talent in other parts of the country. And so over the last sort of year and a half, we have expanded a bit, and we're excited to continue growing those offices.
Yeah, and how do we maintain collaboration between these offices? It's something that obviously the world has adapted to during COVID, but how do we continue that with return to office?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think we're perfect at it, by the way. I don't think it's possible to be perfect at something like that, but we try our very best. And so, some of the ways we do that are making sure that, when we have Zoom meetings, we're really inclusive and making sure that we're not just focusing on the people who might happen to be in the main conference room, encouraging people to actually ask for input. Sometimes people on the Zoom, they might feel a little bit disconnected. They might not, maybe they're a little bit more shy, maybe they don't speak up. So encouraging folks to actually proactively ask for other input from people who might not be raising their hand is one thing we can do. We also make sure to give people at remote sites opportunities to come spend time here at our headquarters in Foster City from time to time so that they do get the benefit of those in-person interactions.
That leads us to the next question. What exactly is Zoox's remote policy?
Complicated one, right? Because you have so many different people in so many different situations, and so it might be hard to articulate the entire remote policy here, but fundamentally we do really value in-person work. And it's not just because we don't think people can do their jobs remotely. I mean, certain jobs can be done pretty effectively remotely. Some people actually enjoy working from home and actually in some cases may even be more productive without all the distractions of an office. But one of the things that we've seen at Zoox, and I don't think this is unique to Zoox, but it might be extra important here because of what we're doing is super cross-functional and we're building a physical product. There are a lot of intangibles that come with having those in-person interactions. You sort of see people in the hallways. If you have a question that maybe, it's only a 2 or 3 minute question, it's not enough of a question to set up a whole meeting. You could maybe, you could message or Slack the person or email the person, but sometimes there's sort of an overhead with that. So there's a lot of value that comes from these kind of spontaneous, impromptu or quick conversations. But I think beyond that, there's a certain sense of if you really want to grow in your career, and not just do your job, because it's can you do your job remotely? Probably. But if you want to grow in your career and sort of learn how to influence people and sort of become a leader, and when I say a leader, I don't necessarily mean a manager of people, but a leader where you can influence things, whether it's technical, architecture, process-wise, people-wise, whatever, doing that in real life with other people, there's just something really valuable, and I don't think we've figured out as a society how to perfectly replicate that digitally and remotely. So when we have remote employees, which are kind of more of the exception, we do some of the things I mentioned previously to try to keep them as engaged as possible. For the employees who are local or who work out of one of our offices, our policy is we expect people to come into the office at least 3 days a week, and then you can work from home 1 or 2 days a week, assuming that your job allows you to be effective, partly remotely. And then if you do come in 3 days a week, we give you what's called a flex desk. So you come in and you use one of the available desks. If you'd like your own permanent desk where you can sort of leave your stuff and that's your spot, then we ask you to come in 4 or 5 days a week. So that's how we do it. And, it's been pretty good. Is it perfect? Absolutely not.
Yep.
Is everybody like, this is the best thing ever? No. But I will say when we rolled out that policy, even some of the folks, who are kind of coming out of the pandemic were like, I don't know if I feel like going to work anymore. Almost everybody has been like, oh, actually, I really love seeing people and sort of having that flexibility to come in, 3 or 4 or 5 days a week, but have those in-person interactions. It's been going really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot that was missing that I didn't realize was missing over the last 2 years of the pandemic when we were working from home, and coming back to the office, just the sharing of ideas, the breaking of bread during lunch, and just interacting with other teams, and both live in the hallway as well as in meetings. It's just that the communication just flows a little bit differently than it does fully remote, and it's really benefited at least my team in particular as we've started to get back to scaling and growing the company. Okay, so this question is more for me. After applying to a particular position, how long should we expect to hear back from you? We get a lot of applicants. And I know that our team tries our very best to get back to every single candidate and at least give them a yes or no answer. We typically will try to review resumes that come in through the applicant pool at least once a week. So typically, I would expect to hear back within 2 to 3 weeks on average, depending on when you apply and the recruiter that's working on that position. Okay, what advice would you give a candidate who is interviewing at Zoox? Great question. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The first thing I would say is do your research. Knowing the company, knowing what we do, knowing that we're even an autonomous vehicle company, you would be surprised. That's really important. But beyond that, working with your recruiter, working with people in the early stages of the process to really prepare for the interviews and really know what you're interviewing for, and those are all really important to help prepare for the interviews. Jesse, what have you seen in preparation? What could candidates do better?
So I think that understanding the particular job and what we're looking for and how that fits into the broader context of Zoox is important. If you're not sure, by the way, those are good questions to ask during your interview process. Yep. Again, it's part of being inquisitive. It's always odd to me sometimes if I interview a candidate, I'll always make sure that there's time for them to ask me questions at the end. And if somebody says I have no questions, that's a little bit strange to me. Like, not that I'm so interesting necessarily, but if you can't think of a single question, then it makes me think that maybe you're just not very curious. I doubt that our interview process was so perfect that we answered every possible question you could have. And so again, it's like, if the question you can ask has maybe a little bit to do with how you fit into the company, that's great. It doesn't have to be, right? You can ask me a question about, our strategy or how we differentiate ourselves from other companies. But I think it's nice if at least you can sort of tie in, how what you do might fit in and help what we do, and try to learn more about that.
Yeah, we try to build an interview process that really allows for the candidate to also interview us. It's really important for that to happen because you're going to be committing a lot of time to the company and working with us. So we want you to really understand the organization, the people that you're going to be working with. So we don't shy away from hard questions. Feel free to ask the hard questions. We want to get to know you as a part of our interview process, in addition to obviously the more quantitative skill-based interviews. We know the interviews are imperfect, so we do try our best to make sure we're bringing the best talent possible, and hopefully you can put your best foot forward as well. Okay, as a program manager coming from the financial services space, are there any courses or resources on AV that you recommend to help me stand out from the pack?
That's an interesting one. There are definitely some sort of, I think Udacity has a couple of courses on sort of learning how autonomous vehicles work. I think there might be something on Coursera. Who knows? Maybe even LinkedIn has something nowadays. So I definitely think that's a great idea, just to sort of, learn as much as you can. At the same time, I don't want to sort of oversell that. Like if you say, I have a certificate or a nano degree in this other thing, like it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be like, oh my God, this person like automatically is super qualified for this position, because, whatever your sort of main area expertise is and whatever the thing is that we would be hiring you to do, the most important thing is that you're qualified in that area. And so if you're really good at a thing that we need, even if you don't know too much about autonomous vehicles, that's okay. But if you are interested in autonomous vehicles, whether it's, how they work on a technical side or some of the kind of, policy or societal implications, it certainly doesn't hurt to educate yourself. And worst case, hopefully you learn something interesting.
Yeah, nano degrees are great. More specifically, the knowledge they give you as a candidate, you're able to answer some of the interview questions that we give you better and really understand the space better. And that goes all the way back to really knowing what you're getting into. So then how you can translate skills that you picked up in the financial services space over to a role at Zoox. Yep. Okay, so what core skills are you looking for when hiring machine learning engineers?
So the most important thing that we're looking for is that you actually understand how the machine learning algorithms work, and how you could sort of adjust them. And I think we see a lot of folks come through who they've sort of learned how to train a model. Like they're like, okay, I download this PyTorch or this TensorFlow or this, and I give it some training data, and then I get a model, and like now I'm a machine learning engineer. And that's actually, there's nothing wrong with, like, that's a good skill set to have, and you can do great things with that. But when we're looking for machine learning engineers at Zoox, we're looking for people who have sort of a 2 or 3 layer deeper understanding. So you can kind of go through the math of how does this machine learning algorithm work? Why might this machine learning algorithm work better or worse than this other one? If you train a model and you have this, you see that it has some limitations, what are some of the things you might do to try to improve it? Whether it's on the training data side or the actual model, or how you connect the layers, or whatever it is. And we really try to make sure people have that sort of significantly deeper understanding. That's not something that everybody has. But given that we are really trying to innovate on the core algorithms and how we put them together, that's something that's important to us.
Right, and I think a common question that sort of segues off of that I often get from candidates is, if somebody does not have a machine learning background, is that something that they can pick up here at Zoox?
So yes and no, right? Like, I don't think that we would typically hire somebody into a machine learning position with no machine learning experience. Having said that, we have actually done a really great job, especially with our internal mobility program, of helping people who came into Zoox maybe without much of a machine learning background, who had a lot of interest in machine learning, get that experience in their job and then transition to be a machine learning engineer. So sometimes people come from QA or from software infrastructure or from areas where you might not have to have that type of an AI background, and then sort of they've gotten to work with other people who have that background just because they're curious, and then over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period, they've kind of transitioned to that new area, and some of them have become absolutely amazing, right? It's like one of our absolute best engineers in prediction. One of our, we don't have too many senior staff engineers, but one of our senior staff engineers in prediction joined us as a software infrastructure engineer without too much of an AI or machine learning background. And he's one of our best AI ML people now. And he's gotten a lot of that experience in the, 6 or 7 years that he's been at Zoox, which is super rewarding to see.
Yeah, I think I may or may not have recruited that person.
Thank you.
But that's something that's really important to emphasize. I think on-the-job learning has been is undervalued. I think people often think that they need to go get a degree in something to really do the job. And oftentimes what we've seen at Zoox is some of our best engineers, our best employees actually transition in those roles from other fields, and they actually learn on the job over the course of several years with us. And I think one thing that Zoox does really well is allow for people to really acquire new skills and work with other people. And that's just part of our overall culture. Could you tell us some common programming languages and libraries that we should be acquainted with, and the concepts that we should be experienced with in order to be a good fit at Zoox?
So the most common programming language we use at Zoox are C++ and Python. C++ mostly for things that run on vehicle, and Python mostly for things that don't, but there's some of everything. Actually, I think the most important thing is not that you need to learn a particular language or library. We actually, when we interview candidates, we do less of like, oh, do you know this specific piece of syntax? There's a little bit of that, but it's more like, how do you think, right? Can you write an algorithm to solve this problem in your favorite programming language? Or, let's think about system design and system architecture. So we're not so much looking like, are you the expert at this particular library? We assume that by the time you've learned computer science, whether it's in school or some other way, and by the time you have hopefully some industry experience, that you can translate those skills to other programming languages or other libraries. If you can only do, I only know this one language and I can't do anything else, that would probably be pretty limiting.
Yeah. Okay, what is the format of the 4 to 5 hour in-person interview day? All one-on-ones, a presentation to a group, panel interviews, all the above? It's all the above. Zoox is a very diverse workforce, like I mentioned previously. We have hardware, software, operations, manufacturing, all the support functions you can imagine. So each team has a different preset interview process, and you'll see that some teams, for example, with our procurement and supply chain team, they ask everyone to do a presentation. That's a part of their workflow. For our hardware teams, they have take-home assignments. For technician roles, we have welding tests. For software engineering roles, we have programming interviews and even some math interviews. So it's really dependent on the role, and I encourage you to talk with your recruiter, work with your recruiter on figuring out what you're expected to interview for, and also what your interview day looks like.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
When we interview you, of course we're looking at, do you have these particular skills? Can you solve these types of problems? But another thing we're looking for, and I think we care maybe even more at Zoox than most companies do, is how do you think through problems, right? Like, what is your thought process? What do you do when you get stuck? Our interviews, generally speaking, will give you hints if you're stuck. It's just not like, oh, let's stump you and see where you fail and then laugh at you because you don't know some formula or like nothing like that. When you're working in a company, you're going to get stuck from time to time. You're going to need help. And so one of the most important signals we can get in an interview is, when you need help from the interviewer, can you take their hint? Can you take their suggestion? Instead of getting flustered or embarrassed, can you take that suggestion and then continue your way through the problem? And so we're not trying to trick or stump people. We're actually trying to see, when you do need help, can you get that help and finish the problem and get somewhere? Because that's how real life is. That's how work is. You're not expected to just go in a room by yourself, solve everything, and come back with the answer.
Yeah, even more so in the AV space. It's a largely unsolved problem, although times are changing, and a big part of our culture is to be inquisitive. It's one of our core values. So Jesse's absolutely right. Okay, as an AV enthusiast, I am particularly interested in Zoox. With the growth at Zoox, are there going to be data engineering opportunities?
Very much so. So this is among other things, very much a big data problem. People don't really say big data anymore. That was more like 5-10 years ago. Yeah. But it's a lot of data, right? Like, we are generating and collecting and recording and processing just absolutely, petabytes on petabytes of data. And so, if you're a data engineer and you like working with large amounts of data and doing analytics on that data, please apply to Zoox. We have a lot of interesting problems in that space.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. We have a lot of openings. How can I best highlight my strengths during the application process? I can answer this, but do you want to take this? Okay,
no,
I'll take it.
This, yeah.
All right, yeah.
You're the recruiter, right?
Yeah, of course. So it starts with your resume, of course. We're really looking for people that are able to talk about what they've actually done and not what they've been a part of. So what have you actually contributed to projects? What have you actually delivered? What have you actually shipped? The second part is that we really value people that have been at companies and been in roles for a good amount of time to actually seen a full life cycle happen. So I know some people have slightly jumpier job histories, and we want to know what you've actually accomplished during that tenure, right? And also what's happened. And that comes with conversations with your recruiter. So a lot of our recruiters are really there to be your partner through the process. They want to get the role filled as well. So they want to hear about your strengths. So working with them and telling them about what you're good at, what are some areas that you're interested in growing in. Those are all things that we value as a recruiting organization and as well as a company. Okay, what roles and departments are you looking to grow this year?
Almost everything. We're really fortunate in this economic environment to still be growing the company significantly, and we're actually adding more than 500 jobs this year. So pretty much the whole company is growing. So please take a look at our job site. I think we have a few hundred open positions at least, and so there's something for almost everyone.
Okay, last question. Everyone wants to know when they will be able to use a Zoox. Do you have a timeline that you care to share?
I wish I could share all the details. I'll say a little bit, though. So as people now know, in February, we first started operating our robotaxis on open public roads. which we're very excited about. But that's just the beginning, because it's we took one vehicle, we drove it on the weekend in Foster City around our buildings, a couple miles of road. Still, interesting traffic lights, 35 miles an hour, unprotected intersections, so not easy. But we're in the process of trying to scale that, and so this year we're going to be testing in other cities. You can probably use your imagination where, because we've talked about San Francisco and Las Vegas publicly as two cities we'd like to launch in. So you can expect to see us testing in those cities with our robotaxi in the not too distant future. And we're also excited that the robotaxis in Foster City are going to be operating continuously 5 days a week, starting in just a couple of months, so that our employees can just use Zooxes to get around Foster City, which is going to be really exciting. But of course, we want to bring that to other people, and you'll have to wait till next year. If you're not a Zoox person, you probably have to wait till at least next year to get in one of our vehicles. But we're really excited for more people to be able to try that.
Yeah, we're very excited for that. Okay, that wraps it up. Thank you all for tuning in today and for all the great questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everybody, but we hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jesse. It's an incredibly exciting time at Zoox. We're hiring across several teams, as we've mentioned. Please reach out if you're interested in joining our crew. Take a look through the available job listings on our career page via the QR code on the screen. Or feel free to reach out to myself or our hiring team. Their email is talent@zoox.com. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the week.